Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It's ya dude, the unconquerable Wafflesaurus gamer. Today, I've got a real treat for you. As far as jobs go, flying free to Japan to edit footage was pretty good. I'd been the other half of my best friend's YouTube channel for nearly 2 years now, his dedicated editor and sometimes cameraman when the need arose. Travis, or Wafflesaurus Gamer, as he was known on YouTube, had a fairly popular Let's Play channel, in which he played everything from the shiniest new games to the oldest retro titles to the most ghastly train wrecks the internet has to offer. He had a modest fan base that seemed to like his Logan Paul-esque style, and the guests he had from time to time were entertaining enough to hold the attention of an 8 to 25-year-old demographic. 2 weeks ago, though, someone had sent him a weird one. The guy claimed to be from the outskirts of Japan, said he and his brother had gone to a game parlor with a reputation for obscure titles. They had gone to play a game that had been stirring up rumors in their little town, a game called Your Corner of Hell. The writer said very little was known about the game, but some kids in the village were supposed to have gone crazy or killed themselves because of the things they had seen in the game. The two had, of course, wanted to play this mysterious game. The owner had heard their request, money had changed hands, and the guy and his brother had been invited to the back of the arcade to play the game. The older brother had gone first. The room had a one-occupant rule, and the younger brother waited for a while his brother played for what seemed like hours. We went into the arcade at 10:30, just as they opened, but my brother didn't come out of that room until well past dark. The younger brother had sat for around an hour before boredom brought him back into the arcade. I spent several hours playing the machines, down to the lint in my pockets, and still he hadn't come out. As the sun went down, he heard a commotion near the front. The owner was carrying someone over his shoulder and shouting at the younger brother to get lost. The owner shoved him from behind, his meaty hand moving him easily. When the younger brother was on the sidewalk, the owner had tossed the thing that he'd been carrying onto the pavement and shuttered his shop up for the night. The thing he had been carrying turned out to be the boy's older brother. He was unconscious. The doctors say he's in some kind of coma and he may never recover. The owner denied that he'd ever even seen us, of course, and he has some kind of connections that keep the police from investigating him too closely. I know you play weird games, and I hate to bring you into something like this, but could you please go and try to find this game? The man at the parlor will let you in the back if you tell him Lilith sent you. Please, if you can find out what my brother saw, maybe they can help him. And now, here we were, standing outside the shabby arcade. We had flown into Hiroshima and taken a train out to the town of Tomonoru so we could meet the younger brother, a 15-year-old named Hisu. He recounted the tale to us as we sat in his mother's kitchen and drank some strong tea. The boy's hands had trembled as he spoke, and he seemed on the verge of tears as he retold his story. My parents are at the hospital with Ichi, praying that he will recover. He was supposed to go to university this year, but now it's unlikely that he will ever recover. The kid's English was pretty good, but when Travis asked if he wanted to come with us, I didn't need words to read the terror on his face. I haven't been back since the incident. I won't go near it again. A lot of kids in the village won't go there anymore either, not after what happened to Ichi. He wished us luck and said that he would pray for our return. Standing outside the grungy arcade, I didn't see what all the fuss was about. The facade was filthy, ivy hanging from the canopy, and bars installed over the dingy windows. The dust on the windows looked like you could have written in it, and the spiderwebs in the corners looked old enough to have seen the Reagan administration. The door was a black, gaping mouth with a roll-down shutter that would lock at night. As we stood, I could hear the beeps and plinks from inside, the familiar sounds of Pac-Man and Street Fighter, and the sounds were comforting somehow. Even in this foreign land, the sounds of familiar games could bring me comfort. "So, got everything hooked up?" I asked, going over his setup one more time. His glasses were set up with a pair of digital recorders that were damn near undetectable. As he recorded, the camera feed would be continuously uploading to the cloud. I could pick through the footage later and edit it into something usable for the channel. Since I couldn't come with him, he would have to record his events as he saw them. I was mostly on location to call the police if anything weird happened. A few local kids may not pique the police's interest, but an American tourist with 500,000 sub count might make them a little more willing to investigate this place. It made me feel like a real reporter, working in the field to expose the truth. How quickly we forget that those people, too, can die. It's as ready as it'll ever be. Let's see if there's anything to see, Travis said. A big grin spread across his face. We walked into the building that was awash with blinking lights and a cacophony of sounds. Children of all ages were hunkered over the blinking machines. Others were running around and laughing as they tried to find their favorite games. I could hear the wooden chunk of a skee-ball machine, the metallic clink of an air hockey table as the puck zipped around the smooth surface, the hollow boom of a shooting game, and the pop tunes of Dance Dance Revolution. The owner had a modest collection of classic arcade cabinets as well, and even at a glance, I could tell that this was a place that made money. Standing behind the counter, looming like a monster amidst the brightly colored prizes and flashing signs, was a giant, grinning man. He was easily 7 feet tall, and nearly as wide. He had an oily mustache that sat under a bulbous, greasy nose, and his eyes were like a mean-spirited pig that loves to snap at curious children. He reminded me of a picture book I had owned as a child, Puss in Boots, and how the ogre had made me feel scared. The warty ogre had sat on his cushion in his beautiful clothes and looked down at the cat as it wove its lies. Even as a child, I had thought the look made him look menacing. It was a look that said plainly the cat was in danger of being devoured. The man spoke to Travis in what I assumed was Japanese, a language I was not familiar with, and Travis spoke back to him with relative ease. The man smiled, showing several blackened teeth, and spoke to Travis in English, though this English sounded more like European than actual American English. "Ah, an American. So word of my special game has spread that far, eh?" "Infamy more like it," Travis said. The man's smile looked a little off after that. "You'll need to sign a waiver if you'd like to play. After the last incident, I really must protect myself from further accusations." Travis scanned the document, looking for traps, and I asked the owner about the game. "What is it that seems to be making your customers react so badly?" "Well, there are the usual rumors that surround the game. The creator died, his spirit haunts the game is actually a portal to hell. Many strange rumors surround my little shop, but I can assure you that the game is just a regular game. Nothing special that need elicit such reactions." Travis had finished signing the paperwork and was ready to see this game. "Only one of you at a time, boys. You'll have to wait out here," he said, pointing a dirty finger at me as Travis stepped behind the counter. The last time I saw Travis, he flashed me a peace sign and smiled with a big grin. "See you on the other side," he intoned. Then he disappeared into the shadowy back room as I remained in the world of flashing lights and familiar sounds. I turned away from the counter and found myself drawn by the brightly colored lights and the machine's electronic blare. I spent some time playing familiar games: Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom, Time Crisis 2, House of the Dead. I took a spin at Initial D, a very intuitive racing game, and had my ass handed to me by a local kid at Street Fighter 2. These same kids then talked me into playing Dance Dance Revolution with them, and I had a blast as I tripped along to several of the fast and bubbly songs they picked. I lost track of time for a while, enjoying myself, enjoying the company of kids half my age who didn't speak a word of my language. When a shadow fell across us, though, their smiling faces curdled and they scattered like birds. I looked up from some unpronounceable game that hadn't made it to America and found the owner standing over me, 2 large men flanking him. He looked angry, his face wooden yet still smiling, and he told me to get my things and leave. I was shocked. Was he kicking me out? Had I violated some unknown rule? I had easily spent $50 in this place, and the idea that he was here to pull me out made no sense. I'm here with my friend, the one in the back. I'll leave when he finishes his... He's gone. He broke a costly machine and left out the back. Now I want you gone, too, before I call the authorities. Wait, I stammered. Which way did he go? I'm a stranger here. I don't know any... But it seemed they weren't here to negotiate with me. The 2 large men had me under the arms in a heartbeat, and before I knew it, I was half drugged, half carried from the shop. They deposited me onto the sidewalk with a distinct lack of grace, and the owner stood in the doorway as I got up and stood with confusion. "You and your friend are banned. Leave the premises before I call the authorities," he said, evenly, before slamming the shutter down in my face. That's how I came to be outside the dingy shop without Travis, half a world from home with no clue how to get back. I had no choice but to walk to the Hisawa residence. He was the only person I knew in Tamanoru, and without knowing how to speak the language, I was practically helpless. Hisawa spoke English, Hisawa knew the area, and Hisawa knew the people that lived in the village. Hopefully one of them could help me find Travis, and I could get him through whatever was going on so we could get home. Also, Hisawa had a computer, which I would need to find Travis. Travis had gone to the back wearing the glasses. The camera on those glasses had been uploading to the cloud for the past 5 hours. If I could link up with the cloud, I could watch the video he had uploaded and get some ideas of where he was going. That would allow me to find him and get us both back home. If only it had been that easy. Hisawa, it turned out, wasn't home. His house was locked up, and the lights inside were dark. He had probably gone to see his brother in the hospital, and as dusk began to set, I made my way back into town. I was looking for somewhere, anywhere with Wi-Fi, to access the videos on my phone. It wouldn't be as stable as accessing them from a dedicated connection, but if it helped me find Travis, I didn't care how I went about it. It was getting dark, and I started to worry that I wouldn't find him until morning. When the familiar arches of a McDonald's came into view, I breathed a sigh of relief. They had Wi-Fi, and after purchasing some food, I was pretty hungry after not eating all day, I plopped down in a booth near the back wall and made my way into the file program. The file was there, but the program had stopped updating about 20 minutes ago. That was weird, but if he had wandered off the signal range, it could be that the program couldn't get a connection anymore. I clicked on the file and got 6 hours worth of video. I gasped. Surely I hadn't been in the arcade that long. It didn't feel like I had been in there any time, but my stomach was empty, and I had been known to lose track of time when I was playing games. I ate as the file finished downloading. I had finished my food when a message popped up that the files were ready to view. The video began as we walked on the sidewalk. I heard myself asked if the equipment was working okay. We walked inside, spoke with the owner, and I could hear myself asking questions as Travis looked over the paperwork. He signed, followed the guy into the back, and turned suddenly to treat me to a last look at my worried face. "See you on the other side," he intoned, before turning back and walking into the dim back room. He walked past a line of overstuffed shelves to a hallway with several closed doors. Some of the doors had shadow lights beneath them, shadowy forms doing God knew what, but the man led him to a particular door and opened it with a key. Inside was a sit-down cabinet similar to the old joystick arcade games. The cabinet filled the room, and there was barely enough room to enter as Travis stepped inside. "When you're done, lock the door as you leave," the man said, his almost European tone still hanging over his voice, not like the angry one I had gotten as he threw me on the sidewalk. Then he closed the door, and Travis was alone with the softly glowing screen. The screen was large, 50 inches at least, and the words "Your Corner of Hell" pulsated across it. Travis looked for a coin slot and found none. He sat down and grasped the joystick, a single piece of plastic with no buttons or triggers. He looked around for a start button. Travis spoke to the audience, telling them that this was the game that had garnered all the hype, and he was going to see what all the fuss was about. He had just said something about not finding a start button when the screen emitted an odd static noise and bathed the room in a harsh white light. Travis snapped his eyes forward, and I had to shield my own eyes against the bright intrusion. Then the screen darkened, and Travis was staring at a bleak landscape of reds and blacks. He moved the joystick, the screen panning around, and it became apparent that he was in a cave. Travis praised the graphics, walking up to the wall and inspecting the textures. I had to admit, it was very impressive. The renderings were far beyond anything the cabinet or the screen should have been capable of. For a second, I could swear the pictures on the console were real-time. The cave walls were made of dark stone with veins of red that wound through them in arteries. The walls pulsated and moved oddly, and when he turned, there was a dim light coming from the end of the tunnel behind him. Shapes moved in that light, strangely proportioned shapes, and Travis seemed hesitant to go in that direction. After a few seconds of half-heartedly looking around, though, he discovered that this was the only route and moved his character down the tunnel. Kind of basic for a game with such well-defined graphics, but whatever, Travis grumbled as he moved up the pulsating tunnel, viewing the weird rocks around him. I heard him gasp when the tunnel roof gave way to the sky, and my own breath stuck in my throat at the sight. The sky was a deep red, the red of heart's blood, and as he took it all in, I could see bodies falling from it ceaselessly. They fell close, they fell far away, and the ones that fell close to the cave splattered on the ground with sickening realism. Travis jumped back, startled as the realistic gore splattered across the ground, and I heard him use a word that would have definitely got us demonetized if I wasn't going to edit it out later. I reached for my earbuds as a family lumbered past on their way to the bathroom, the squelching making my stomach flip over a little as it erupted again and again. I didn't want anyone to hear these sounds. Hell, I didn't want to listen to these sounds when it came right down to it. As I slipped my earbuds in, I heard Travis mumbling about the level of gore as a body landed a few feet from him and burst like an overripe fruit. He seemed more intrigued than angry, though. Then, as Travis watched the body, it got up. Its limbs popped grotesquely back into place, and the naked humanoid, bald and sexless, got up and stumbled away from the site of its landing. It ignored Travis, stumbling across the dark sand that covered the ground. I could hear Travis breathing hard as he watched, and after some hesitation, he followed it. It stumbled across the sand, jumping as the hot sand burned its feet, and as it traveled away from the cave, Travis could see it joining groups of other battered bodies. They didn't speak. They grouped out of pure instinct and shuffled along as the black sand gave way to sluggish rivers of living fire. The group seemed to shy away from the fire, and I really couldn't blame them. Something seemed to be moving within the flames, and the group of bodies seemed to know that it was something that wanted to hurt them. Travis followed them, but never joined their group. He seemed to understand that these skittish creatures, humans or not, would be a target for whatever lived here, and their group would attract a lot of attention. As if to prove that point, one of them strayed a little too close to the fire and was ensnared by an arm of living flame that dragged it into the fiery river. The group looked after him, marking his departure, but they neither mourned him or slowed. They kept moving, and I could see other groups moving similarly as Travis used the joystick to look around. "What in the hell is going on with this game?" Travis asked as he followed the group at a safe distance. Am I supposed to follow them? Am I supposed to strike out on my own? I don't get the point here. He decided to follow them, despite their lack of direction, and as they neared a field of sharp black grass, I saw a creature jump out to challenge them. He was average height, his skin a deep maroon, and somehow he reminded me of the shopkeeper at the arcade. He was as wide as he was tall, and he looked at the group with a broad smile on his face. It was a distinctly gobble-you-up sort of smile. It spoke to them in a strange language, completely ignoring Travis as he moved in for a closer look, and some of the creatures stepped forward hesitantly to stand near him. The rest stood their ground, unsure of the stranger or whatever he was offering. It didn't matter. The nets came flying from the grass then, and the creatures yelled in a very human way as they were captured. Some tried to flee, others were resigned to their fate, but none of them tried to fight back. They were sheep, and soon they would be rounded up and taken to wherever it was they were bound. They made piteous noises as the nets fell over them, which seemed to push Travis to action. Travis rushed at the creatures, yelling at them to get the hell away, but since he possessed no weapons, he attempted to run his body into them and stop them from taking the struggling humanoids. He bumped the creatures, foundering against them, and the creatures took no more notice of him than an ant. They had the group rounded up in no time, and when they walked into the grass with their prize, Travis followed them into that sea of blackness. Maybe I'm supposed to follow them, he said, his voice a little frantic. Maybe that's my goal? He moved into the grass like a blind man, losing the creatures almost at once. When he came out, he was alone in a dark world of black sand and endless miles. He traveled into the emptiness, unsure of where he was going. He moved aimlessly, the hellscape never changing, and the falling bodies never ceasing. Travis didn't follow them anymore, though. He seemed to think it was pointless, and as he moved deeper in, I could hear his breathing becoming frantic and unsure. The game was presenting him nothing but a vast world to explore, but he seemed unable to interact with it or alter it. There were no trees to punch, no shelters to make, no goals to accomplish, and the only constant seemed to be the moans of the falling bodies or the distant screams of the unseen. The screams would erupt distantly, sending Travis turning frantically in that direction before returning to his chosen path. He had seen no one but the creatures and the humanoids they hunted, and he was becoming a little paranoid of the big open landscape. Travis began his journey into emptiness with some commentary on the landscape, the graphics, and the game's strangeness. The farther he went into the wasteland, the more addled he seemed to become. He talked less to the audience and more to himself. At first it was just idle talk, wondering if he was going the right way or not, but slowly his speech began to descend into mumbling. The screams were starting to get to him, and I was worried that he might be losing it as his camera panned around for what felt like the 1,000th time. I fast-forwarded a little bit. His trip through the wasteland made up almost 4 hours of the total video. When he had stopped in the desert, staring at a fixed point for several minutes, I started the video and returned to his heavy, labored breathing as he stared into the distance. He sounded ragged, as though he had been slogging for hours for real, and he just stared into the distance for no reason, intense on something. Suddenly he ran towards whatever he was seeing. The camera footage was secondhand, and I leaned in as the McDonald's crowd bustled around me, trying to see what he was seeing. Whatever it was had excited him. Whatever it was had piqued his curiosity. He ran like a man possessed, stumbling in the game as he made his way over the shifting sands towards whatever lay beyond. When the first tree of the grove came into view, I thought I knew what he had seen. When I saw what was hanging from the tree, I wondered why he was in such a hurry to get to them. The grove of dark and twisted trees came looming up from the spinning air. They weren't tall, maybe 8 feet, but each of them bore a length of rope that swung from its branches. At the end of each rope was a sexless humanoid. As Travis got close, I could see the purple bruises around their necks and the boneless way they hung from the dead trees. The grove was nothing but these grotesque wind chimes, and Travis seemed less eager as he walked into it. When the first one started screaming, I cried out right along with Travis. It came as a sudden eruption in my right ear, and my sudden yelp made a couple across from me frown and look at me oddly. I apologized, turning back to the video to see Travis studying the poor creature as it twisted on the noose. It grabbed at him, speaking in a strange language that might have been English once. It held its arms out to him, pleading for relief, or for release, or something, and Travis backed away before bolting. The forest came alive then, the tortured screams and shaking trees erupting into a cacophony and fury, and Travis began to run frantically amidst the swinging horrors. He fell suddenly, tripping over a root, and when he looked up, I heard him sob audibly as his eyes fell on a single, withered humanoid. It might have once been female, but as it was, its chest was flat, its crotch smooth, and its head hairless and lumpy. As it lifted its searching, begging face to him, I could see a single half-moon scar on its cheek. She screamed and wailed just as the others had, but there was a deep longing for release in her eyes. She begged him with her eyes, cried at him with her wailing mouth, and Travis could do nothing but stare at her as she wailed into the void. "Mom?" he breathed, his voice shaky. Travis had lost his mom last year to cancer. I had known her all my life. She had made Travis and I snacks after school, drove us places in our teens, and Travis had always been so close with her that she became like a second mother to me. How many times had I seen that scar on her cheek and wondered how she'd gotten it? Her face was still as sunken as it had been in the hospital as she lay dying, and as that screaming face stared back at Travis, I saw him snap like an over-tightened guitar string. His fists came up, and he slammed them into the screen. The cabinet shook, the image shivering, but Travis was far from satisfied. He slammed his fists, he kicked his booted feet, and he screamed like a wild man as the cabinet jerked and bent under his assault. How had I not heard him? How had I been feet away, having the time of my life, while my best friend had gone through the worst trauma of his? How had I not heard him screaming? How had I not heard his fury? As the cabinet sparked and broke, I could hear him screaming the same thing again and again, and it broke my heart to hear the pain in it. "Mom! Mom! Mom! Mom!" The door swung open, and the arcade owner screamed at him, wanting to know what he was doing. Travis rushed the man, his smile now an angry gnash of teeth, and shoved him out of the way as he made a break for the back room. He turned to look at the store owner, and for just a moment, I could see the faces of those creatures that had captured the humanoids. His gnash of teeth looked like the beast's frozen grin, and I could almost hear Travis coming to the same conclusion. He bolted for the back door, and I saw him run out into the dingy alley. He looked around frantically, people on the street staring in mistrust, before taking a left turn and heading in the opposite direction we had come. He ran up the streets of Tamanaru, a stranger in a strange land, and the people on the street gave him a wide berth. He was frantic, moving like a wild animal, and when he stopped suddenly, I leaned in close to see what he was looking at. He stared, seeming to stare at his reflection in the window across the street, and the people diverted around him as he just sat there, staring. I could see his small reflection in the glass, and he looked haggard, crazed even, but his face was filled with that unhinged understanding that you sometimes see in the mentally ill. "Mom," he whispered, and without warning, he rushed across the street with the blare of car horns following him. He ran up the street, never slowing, and when he came to a familiar train station, I wondered what he meant to do. He kept calling for his mother, chasing her ghost or something else that only he could see, as people moved out of his way like he might be contagious. He ran through the platform, the rustic wooden benches looking spooky in the near dark, and the people in the loading area cried out as he jumped down onto the track. I wanted to turn away, fearing what would happen next, but I owed it to him to see his end. The train came rolling up, blowing its whistle. He ran towards it, shouting her name. "Mom! Mom!" The train whistle blared, and the people on the platform screamed, "Mom! Mom!" The train lights rolled in close, a blinding corona of light in the eyes of the camera. "Mom!" Everything went white, and then suddenly dark as the video ended. I sat back, stunned, unsure of what I had seen or what I should do. My best friend was dead, a victim of this game that I still don't understand. I watched it secondhand, so maybe it doesn't have the same effect on me, but that's little comfort in the face of my friend's violent departure from life. I have nothing now. I haven't just lost my friend, I've lost my job and my means of returning home. Travis had our tickets in his bag. He had our hotel keys in his pocket. And I'm sitting on the sidewalk of the closed McDonald's now, unsure how to proceed. I don't know what Travis saw in his last minutes of life, but I pray it wasn't his shrieking mother that hung from the skeletal tree of that damned game. All I can do is tell my story and hope that some of you will have answers. All I can do is warn you not to play this game, as enticing as it may seem. Travis would want his death to mean something. He would want his sacrifice to be more than just another Let's Play or a Creepypasta. I pray that if the land in that game is real, Travis didn't become one of those falling things that came from the sky. If there is a God, I pray that he took him somewhere better. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. Time once again to thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to be part of the show, come on down to Patreon. We have many tiers. I'm sure there's one that'll suit you best. Or you can always pick up my book on Amazon. We're reading Dark Vortex right now for our Wednesday story, so come on down and get a copy so you can read along with us. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.